Michael had dreamed of this day for as long as he could remember. After years of working long shifts, saying no to vacations, and putting away every extra dollar, he finally stood in front of a home he could call his own. The small suburban neighborhood seemed perfect. Peaceful streets lined with tall trees, manicured lawns, and neighbors who waved as they passed. For Michael, it felt like stepping into a picture of the life he had always wanted. He smiled as he lifted a box from the moving truck, breathing in the fresh air of what he believed would be his new beginning. But just as the box touched the ground, a sharp, disapproving voice rang out. "You can't park that truck there. It's blocking the stop sign." Startled, Michael turned to see a woman striding toward him. Clipboard in hand, arms crossed tightly, she looked at him with eyes that seemed to measure every mistake. Her name was Karen, though Michael didn't know it yet. Instead of a warm welcome, she opened their first conversation with rules, warnings, and complaints. Michael chuckled politely, assuring her he would be quick. But she didn't stop. She criticized the way the boxes were stacked, frowned at the rug by the doorway, even shook her head at the color of his welcome mat. "This neighborhood has standards," she muttered, jotting something on her clipboard. Michael tried to laugh it off. He told himself every community had one strict neighbor who loved rules more than kindness. But that night, as he unpacked inside, he noticed a shadow outside his window. Karen stood across the street, scribbling notes while staring at his house. A chill ran down his spine. The next morning, a few friendly neighbors came by with polite smiles and quiet greetings. They seemed nice, but their voices lowered whenever Karen's name came up. "She's very involved," one neighbor whispered, before quickly changing the subject. Michael decided not to worry. He had faced bigger challenges in life than an overzealous neighbor. He had worked too hard to let one person ruin his happiness. Still, a small thought lingered in his mind. What if this wasn't just a one-time encounter? He would soon discover that Karen wasn't just nosy or overly strict. She had a reputation. For years, she had controlled the neighborhood with her position on the HOA board, handing out fines, reporting small violations, and making life difficult for anyone who didn't meet her standards. And in Michael, she thought she had found her next victim. What Michael didn't realize was that Karen wasn't simply irritating, she was relentless. And this peaceful new life he had dreamed of was about to turn into a daily battle he never expected. The first week in the new house passed quietly enough. Michael focused on unpacking, setting up furniture, and making his space feel like home. For a brief moment, he convinced himself that maybe Karen's harsh introduction had been just that. A first impression, nothing more. But his hopes were shattered the following Monday morning. When he opened his front door to grab the newspaper, a bright orange paper flapped against the frame. It was taped across his door like a badge of shame. He pulled it off and read carefully. "Violation notice," it said in bold, accusing him of leaving his garbage bins out past collection hours. The penalty, $250. Michael frowned. He clearly remembered rolling the bins back the previous evening, well before the deadline. Just to be sure, he checked the security footage from the small camera above his garage. There it was, Michael pulling the bins in hours earlier, proof that the notice was wrong. At first, he thought it must be a mistake. He decided he'd clear it up at the HOA office, but by the end of the week, another notice appeared. This time, it said his car was parked too close to the curb. Then another. His porch light was too bright. And then another claiming the small flower bed he planted with his niece was not HOA-approved landscaping. Each violation carried a fine, and each fine came with a sting of humiliation. Michael began to notice Karen's smirk whenever she passed by. She would glance at his property, make a note on her clipboard, and walk away with a look of triumph. It became clear this wasn't coincidence. She was targeting him. Determined to defend himself, Michael prepared his evidence and went to the next HOA meeting. The room was filled with residents, some bored, some frustrated. At the head of the table sat Karen, her chin high, voice sharp, acting as if she ran the entire neighborhood. When Michael tried to explain about the bins and showed his camera footage, she cut him off mid-sentence. "Rules are rules," she said coldly. "Excuses don't change violations." The board members glanced at each other but remained silent, clearly too intimidated to challenge her. By the end of the meeting, every fine stood. Michael walked out feeling humiliated and cornered. But Karen didn't stop at fines. A few days later, while mowing his lawn, Michael saw 2 police cars pull up. Confused, he shut off the mower. The officers approached apologetically, explaining that a neighbor had reported suspicious activity. Michael laughed bitterly. Mowing his own lawn was suspicious? The officers apologized and left, but the humiliation of neighbors peeking through curtains cut deep. The calls continued. When his friends came over for dinner, Karen claimed there was disturbing noise. Another time, she accused him of blocking the street when his nephew's car was parked near his driveway. Each time, the police left shaking their heads, powerless to stop the harassment but obligated to respond. Michael's friends urged him to fight back, to sue, or to retaliate. But Michael, though frustrated, chose another path. He began logging everything: the notices, the times of the police calls, the small humiliations. Every detail went into a growing file. He refused to let anger push him into a mistake. He understood something that Karen didn't. Patience could be more powerful than aggression. What Karen didn't know was that Michael wasn't just a homeowner she could bully. Beneath his calm demeanor, he carried a truth that would flip their balance of power upside down. And soon, she would be forced to face it. The breaking point came one quiet evening. Michael returned home from work to find his mailbox dented and his front garden trampled. The flowers his niece had planted with such care were crushed into the dirt, their stems broken like they had been stomped on deliberately. He stood in the driveway, staring at the damage, his jaw tightening. This wasn't about rules anymore. This was personal. Someone wanted to break him, to drive him out of the neighborhood. And in his heart, Michael already knew who was behind it. But instead of losing control, Michael did something unexpected. He went inside, sat at his desk, and pulled out a box of old files. For years, Michael had lived modestly, hiding a part of his life that most people didn't know. He wasn't just a man who worked hard and saved to buy a home. He was also a quiet investor. Over time, he had built a portfolio of rental properties across the city. And this very neighborhood was one of his earliest investments. The truth was, Michael wasn't simply Karen's neighbor. He was also the landlord of several homes in the same community. Some of the very people sitting quietly in HOA meetings, nodding along with Karen's rules, were his tenants. He had never told anyone. He had no interest in flaunting wealth or power. But now, faced with Karen's relentless harassment, he realized it was time to stop hiding. Night after night, he worked carefully, organizing every deed, every lease agreement, every property document. He built a folder so thick and undeniable that it could silence any accusation. This wasn't about revenge. It was about drawing a line and reclaiming the peace he deserved. Meanwhile, Karen strutted around the neighborhood with even more confidence. She told anyone who would listen that she was teaching Michael a lesson. She described him as a troublemaker who didn't respect the rules. Her smug smile grew wider with every story. She had no idea that the man she thought she had under control held her future in his hands. As the date for the next HOA meeting approached, Michael felt a calm determination settle over him. This wasn't just another meeting. It was the stage where the truth would finally come to light. And once it did, Karen's reign of control would crumble in front of everyone. The HOA meeting room buzzed with quiet chatter. Folding chairs scraped against the floor as neighbors settled in, ready for another long list of rules and complaints. Karen sat at the head of the table, clipboard resting proudly in front of her, her expression sharp with authority. When Michael's name appeared on the agenda, Karen wasted no time. She began reciting a list of violations: bins left out, lights too bright, guests overstaying. Her voice carried across the room, confident as always. But before she could finish, Michael stood up. The room fell silent. Michael walked calmly to the front, a thick folder tucked under his arm. He placed it on the table with deliberate care. "I think the community deserves the full picture," he said, his voice steady. He opened the folder and began laying out documents: property deeds, lease agreements, ownership contracts. The papers spread across the table like puzzle pieces, each one revealing a truth no one expected. Michael wasn't just a homeowner, he owned multiple houses in the community. Gasps echoed through the room. Neighbors leaned forward, whispering in shock. Some of them were his tenants and hadn't realized it until that moment. Karen's face drained of color. For years, she had controlled this neighborhood through fear. But now, in the span of a few minutes, her power meant nothing. Michael explained patiently, showing proof for each property. He wasn't raising his voice, wasn't gloating, he was simply laying out facts. The board members shifted uncomfortably, realizing how unfairly he had been treated. For the first time, they looked at Karen not with obedience, but with doubt. And then came the final blow. Michael paused, looked directly at Karen, and said calmly, "Even your home is under my rental agreement." The room erupted in whispers. Karen froze, her mouth opening and closing, no words escaping. The woman who had mocked, fined, and humiliated Michael now sat silent, realizing the truth. Her landlord was the very man she had tried to destroy. The board members leaned over the documents, flipping through pages with wide eyes. One by one, they acknowledged the truth. The fines Karen had imposed were baseless. The police reports, submitted by embarrassed officers, confirmed her pattern of exaggerations. And the residents, emboldened by Michael's quiet strength, finally found the courage to speak. Stories emerged. Other neighbors who had been fined unfairly, bullied, or embarrassed by Karen's heavy hand. Her power unraveled before her eyes. The board stripped her of authority, promising reforms to prevent such abuses again. For years, she had spoken with unchecked control, but now her voice had been silenced by facts she couldn't twist. But the moment that truly broke her came when Michael calmly reminded her of her lease. Her home, the very place from which she launched all her attacks, wasn't even fully hers. It was a rental property, and the man she had sabotaged, mocked, and humiliated was the one who signed her lease as her landlord. Karen's face turned pale. She clutched her clipboard like a shield, but it no longer mattered. Her authority, her confidence, her reputation, they were gone. For the first time, she had nothing to say. Michael didn't raise his voice. He didn't gloat or humiliate her further. He simply said, "This community deserves peace, not fear." His words carried through the room with more weight than any rule Karen had ever cited. From that day forward, Karen disappeared from the spotlight. No more notes, no more fines, no more calls. The residents finally felt free to enjoy their homes without fear of her watchful eyes. And Michael, at last, experienced the quiet life he had dreamed of, not just as a homeowner, but as the man who stood firm against arrogance and showed that patience, truth, and calm strength could outlast even the loudest voices. The quietest neighbor had held the loudest truth, and the neighborhood would never forget it.